Welcome to the Zachrilege cast, Jeremiah Camara. Good to see you.
Oh man, Zach, thanks for having me. Good to see you as well.
And just to let people know what kind of show we have tonight, for the video people, I'm drinking, well, I had this earlier as a local beer from Wild. Is it weird how many breweries have like religious themes? So this is Wild Heaven Brewing. Their
Whoa.
beer has a devil on it, and this is a barrel-aged quad. I guess wrong way. There we go. Whoop.
Oh wow.
Haven't done Camara in a while.
Where'd you go to? You went to Strong Water to get that?
That was a Wild Heaven. And then I have the Oma Gang Bourbon Barrel Adoration, which is good because I have a lot of adoration for my guests tonight. And it's in my Dragon Smoke glass.
I got you.
So, yeah, I haven't done a show in a little bit. So hopefully everybody, it looks like we got Deborah and Jeannie in the chat room, which is cool. So why don't we start from the beginning? So you don't really have like a deep religious background, but did your family take you to church when you were growing up?
Yeah, we went to church. They didn't force it on us. I mean, a lot of times I played baseball growing up. So Sundays we had games. You know, Saturdays and Sundays we had games. And you know, my parents knew I was kind of more interested in watching the Cincinnati Reds than I was going to church. It was fun growing up in the 70s because the Reds were pretty dominant.
Yeah, they were really good, yeah.
Yeah, so it was really fun. But yeah, we went to church quite often, but they didn't make us go. If we didn't want to go to church, we didn't have to. My parents were not deeply religious. They, of course, they believed in Jesus and God and all that. And we had a big Bible in the living room. But I don't say my mother and father were really Bible toters or religious thumpers or whatnot. So I'm glad about that. But despite their, despite the fact that they didn't force it on me, I found a way to force it on myself. So I was looking for it, despite the fact that they weren't trying to give it to me. So
you seem like you gave religion the old college try. So do you say Pentecostal was what the church you're involved in your early 20s?
No, I was into everything. Of course, I was Baptist. We went to a Baptist church. But I was listening to a guy named Stanley Wills, and he lived across the street from me. He was about 3 or 4 years older than me. And one day he told me that if I didn't believe that, he showed me the scripture in Revelations where there would be gnashing of teeth. And I was like 14 or 15 at the time. And that's when my interest in religion really started to take hold, because he terrified me. I remember like 14 years old, after he told me there'll be gnashing of teeth, I believed. He was such a strong persuader, and he was older than me. It's like 17 or 18. I was 14, and I went to bed that night with the sheets up. I mean, I was terrified. I was sweating, and that started me on the path. But I've tried Jehovah's Witness. I was going, door to door. Of course, I tried Islam. I belonged to a mosque in Cincinnati, Ohio. I was in Rockdale Mosque, I think it was called. Of course, I tried Pentecostalism. I was with Herbert Armstrong back in like the mid 80s. And I was like 21 years old and had, got rid of all of my secular albums and everything, and I was sitting up with the old lady who lived across the street with the lights off on Friday night to Saturday night. You're not supposed to do anything. So I have experimented. I went to church 3 and 4 times a week. When I was in Cleveland, I went to seminarian school. I really tried to, like you said, the old college tried to get into religion as much as I could, but it wasn't for me, Zach, and things happened, and I deviated, and I backslid. So shame on me.
Well, you didn't even backslide. Like, you went the other way. I mean, so you went from trying to be religious, or at least saying, hey, everybody's got this cool relationship. I want to have it too. But what made you decide to kind of head the other way and like start doing not necessarily atheist, but just kind of like looking into the Black church experience, like with the books and then your the documentaries and YouTube channel and all your content you've been doing?
Well, there's a couple things. First, I want to speak in tongue. I thought that was fascinating that you could get people to actually speaking in tongue. I was like, whoa, I need the ability to do that. But there were several things. Of course, I remember I asked Dan Barker that question. He said that's kind of like asked me when I grew up. So it was kind of like gradual. But there are a few things that did happen. I had a guy in Cleveland. His name was Robert Chapman, and he would come around me all the time and jingle, change in his pockets and brag about God. And so one day I said, man, you act like he's just your God, because his whole thing was my God, my God. And so he said, listen, man, just come to church with me one day. Because my pastor, he built him and he put him on this pedestal. And I went to church that Sunday. And I was like, finally, I'm going to get what Robert has. And I'm going to feel this. And I'm going to be able to tithe because I'm in the right place now. And I got there, Zach, and the preacher, he was an older gentleman. He walked up and down the aisle. First, they sang for like an hour or like an hour and a half or something like that. It was just a long time of just singing. Then when he preached, he just paraded up and down the aisles and was saying, he's the Alpha and the Omega. There has been none before him. There will be none after him. And he just was saying all these hackneyed, cliched passages that I had been hearing since I was 5 and 6 years old. And I realized then, I said, this is so repetitive. And after that, I started going to different churches and I would hear the preacher saying the same things. There was nothing new. I had been hearing this stuff since I was 5, 6 years old. And I realized then that these preachers are not really teaching. Something is amiss here. Then I read Malcolm X's biography. That really changed my world, because after I read Malcolm X's biography, he gave me a reason to question everything. I know that he was a Muslim, but, I just started questioning things, why things are the way they are, why people dislike you for this and for this. And so that led into religion. I started questioning, and I just started, studying the origins of religion and how it came to be. Then, my mother, when I would talk to her, she would say, wow, you're starting to kind of question the Bible a little bit. I thought you were going to be a preacher. So I moved to Atlanta. And people would ask you what church you went to before they would ask you your name here in Atlanta. Zach, I don't know how it is where you are, but I'm telling you, man, this was like almost like a felony if you didn't go to church in Atlanta. Now, when I didn't go to church in Cleveland and, in Cincinnati, it was not a big deal, but church is huge in Atlanta. And, I knew the time had come to write a book about this, because I was already questioning it. I had been studying it. I knew that something was amiss. And then a couple of years after I wrote my first book, Holy Lockdown, Does the Church Limit Black Progress?, I was invited to speak, invited to attend seminarian school. This was after I had already, went through my transition. So I didn't go to seminarian school to become a pastor. I was invited there by one of the top educators there in order to just attend the class and to see how they were preparing these young people to become ministers.
What was the school? Because it was a local Atlanta place?
Yeah, ITC, Interdenominational Theological College. And it's actually the largest Black theological school, I think, in the country. And so So you got invited to this. Yeah. Like the person knew that you were a non-believer. Right. And said, hey, why don't you get
the inside skinny and show, which you think they do the opposite, but it was kind of
Well,
cool that they did this for you.
He respected me because I was with a guy named Reverend Lister. He moved back to San Antonio, Texas. He has a cattle ranch there. But Reverend Lister took me to see Robert Franklin. Robert Franklin was the president of Morehouse at the time. And when I went into Robert Franklin's office, he recognized me. And that really did. I mean, Robert Franklin, the president of Morehouse, he said, "Hey, Jeremiah Camara, man." And my book was sitting right there on his shelf. He said, "Man, great book." So after that, Reverend Lister introduced me to Dr. Riggins Earl, who was one of the top ministers, top educators at ITC, along with Dr. Mark Lomax, who was in my film Holy Hierarchy. And as I sat in the class, I treated it like class. I read the books that we were instructed to read, and I participated because I really wanted to see, not to be convinced to be into religion. I was quite the contrary, and they all knew it. But we had great discussions, and I actually got a first, hand look at how they were preparing people to administer these churches and come out in the world to preach.
Well, this is probably a good time for you to explain the line I used in the tweet I sent earlier today. You have the learning, but you ain't got the burning.
I learned that in seminary school because in the 50s, we were talking about these various pastors. I think we were talking about South Carolina at the time. But these pastors who had educations, and they were coming with an intellectual approach to the scriptures. And of course, Black people started rejecting that. Many of them did. Not all of them, I'm sure. There's always exceptions. But many of the Blacks started to reject this kind of teaching because they said, "Hey, I know he's got the learning, but he ain't got the burning." In other words, I am not getting my emotional buttons pressed like I'm accustomed to. I'm not leaving church sweating and having this feeling. And so they kind of did away with that, in the 50s and 60s. And then we went to, a mixture of the two in the 70s. And the 80s is when you start to, especially the 90s, when you start to get the fervor of this whole, what do you call it? Prosperity gospels. And we were going to Azusa Street rallies, and you see how these ministers are able to parade around in these suits and look the part. And they had this one guy, his name was Mark Hanby. And Mark Hanby taught spiritual order and kingdom order and spiritual, I can't remember what it was. But anyway, what he was doing was teaching preachers how to make sure that everything that came out of the church benefited them in some kind of way. And so when Mark Hanby got through, I mean, you start to see these guys coming up through, like I said, Azusa Street rally. I don't know if they do it anymore. It started in Los Angeles. It moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And they'd have scouts there, watching these very talented preachers. I think that's where T.D. Jakes came from. They said, "Wow, this man can make us a lot of money." So T.D. Jakes went in, I believe, under the Oral Roberts Foundation, and Creflo Dollar went in under the what is his pastor's name? The guy, under the Kenneth Copeland, foundation. And so that's something that we just like, someone who can entertain us. And if you are a Black preacher that can sing, like Bishop Paul S. Morton, oh my goodness. So whenever your sermon kind of is going this way, you can just stop and bust out with a song, boy. I mean, you got them. So it's huge entertainment. That's a big part of why we do it. And when I met my wife, I told her, I was 23 years old when I met my wife. I told her, I said, "Listen, I'm not a church man," because I was done at 23. 23, that was it for me. No more religion. I'd seen it all. And I knew what direction I want to take for myself and my family. So Uh, before we got married, 3 years before we got married, I told her, I said, I don't do religion. And she said, listen, the only reason why I go to church is to hear the good music. And so even though we were both, non-churchgoers and non-believers, we would play some of the music because the music, I play piano. So a lot of that music was really intriguing. I hear some of those chords that they're playing, and I like that. I like the musical aspect and the voice and all of that kind of stuff. But there's no correlation between good music and good teaching. It's just a form of entertainment.
It hits the emotional notes that are important. But I'll have to take a slight step back. So you got into seminary like after the first book, but what made you decide to write a book about the Black church?
Atlanta did. Because I wasn't used to being kind of, ridiculed or criticized because I didn't go to church. That just didn't happen in the North. I guess you can call Cleveland, Cincinnati the Midwest, but it's the North. And it just wasn't like that. If you didn't go to church, you just didn't go. But here in Atlanta, it was a different type of thing. And I didn't know a lot of people, but people would ask me what church I went to. Before anything else, they needed to know that, are you a Christian? Who's your pastor? And I think some of that is waning. I don't think it's as a big deal now as it was, 25 years ago. I don't even see there are a lot, let me put it like that, but a lot of young people are not even really doing church like we did. So I do see a decline in the overall church picture here in the South, here in Atlanta. But we've got 4 or 5, or maybe even more, mega churches here in Atlanta. And there's a lot of people are, highly committed to going to church here. But what made me write that book was just the fact that I knew something had to be done because I didn't understand how a people had so many problems in their neighborhoods. I understood racism and all that, but God was supposed to fix all of that. And so that correlation between high praise and low productivity kind of resonated with me, and I wanted to know why. And as I went to find various books to, corroborate what I was feeling at the time and wanted to write about, there were none. And I do believe that Holy Lockdown was the first book to actually take a critical look at religion as it relates to Black people and a critical look at the Black church. I could be wrong, but I haven't seen any books that actually criticize religion and criticize the Black church as well. So the book went well. I had a lot of success with it. I wanted to make sure that I didn't come in the spirit of condemnation. I wasn't being condemnatory toward anyone. And as a result, I got invited to speak in a few churches, and also at interdenominational theological college, ITC, here in Atlanta. I spoke twice here. And the last time I spoke, Eddie Long, who's no longer with us, but he was scheduled to speak with me, and they were marching outside. They didn't want him to come because they said that his prosperity gospel wasn't something that they want to hear. And I got up there and I did Jeremiah Camara, and I was accepted well at ITC. And I guess when they heard it, they said, this man makes a lot of sense. And so I thought I was going to get booed and backlashed, like when I spoke at Johnny Youngblood's church in Brooklyn back in 2009. And they introduced me. I was on the panel with 7 other preachers, and they got wind of my book, and I got introduced, and nobody clapped. They clapped for all the other preachers when they said, this is Jeremiah Camara with the book, Holy Lockdown, Does the Church Limit Black Progress? I got about 2 people to clap when I went up on stage. But then after I got to talking, they didn't want me to shut up. And the host, oh man, what's his name? Richard Goldstein or Goldberg or something like that. It's a black guy, but he had that name. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I read his book. I've been reading his book over the past 3 or 4 days, and I'm here to tell you that he knows ministers and the black church more so than we do." And so I was just no stranger to the church. And one of the other things that really kind of took me by surprise was how what I had been talking about in my books and my films, I've been received by the older community, 65 and up, 70, 75, 80. I've got an 80-year-old that I'm in contact with. A few 80-year-olds call me from Mississippi, from Arkansas, and we have a relationship. And that's the most surprising thing, that I just didn't get backlash from the older generation. And what they tell me, son, keep doing what you're doing. I'm 80 years old. I don't have less bills. I'm not paying free. My children have gotten in trouble, and I'm not exempt from anything. I have the same issues that everybody else has had. So don't stop doing what you're doing.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to say, hey, are you surprised you didn't get any backlash? But you already answered it, because you're a professional, dang nabbit.
Well, I don't know about, hey, but I'll tell you.
Well, I have to say, you might be like the last, like, quote unquote dream guest I've had, because I've been following you since when you started doing your YouTube series. When did that start? So you started doing something called Slave Sermons on YouTube, and I discovered it like in 2014, but it's possible it was a little before that. But what made you decide, hey, I'm writing books, but what about doing like a visual medium?
My cousin, he had introduced me to editing. His name is Tony Powell, and can you take her out? I think she wants to go out and talk about my dog.
Sure, yeah.
But he had introduced me to editing back in like 2008. And so the first film that I put out was called The Sunday Habit. That's the first thing I ever did on YouTube, I believe it was, The Sunday Habit. And The Sunday Habit was a phrase that I got from reading the King papers, Dr. Martin Luther King here in Atlanta. You couldn't take pictures, but I spent about 4 or 5 hours reading a lot of his work. And I was editing in it was just a non-professional editing type of software, but I was getting pretty good at it and adept at it, and it came kind of naturally to me. I did some editing back in the 80s when it was just totally different, where you had to actually take the razor blade and cut it.
Cut it and tape it together, right?
And tape it, where you wanted the edit. So I did that. I created a film called Psychological Wars when I was about 25 that dealt with religion and a lot of other things. That's on YouTube as well. And so editing kind of came naturally. Then I went to more advanced, editing software, Final Cut Pro 10 and Premiere and stuff like that. And I said, let me try my hand at really expressing what I want to express in a video form. And I had no idea how big that was going to take off. If I would do it differently, I might put out one a week, because I've got like 50 now. That took me a year, but I put a bunch out. I was just kicking them out. I might put two out in a week or something like that, 2 or 3 sometimes. Mm-hmm. So I started that, and I saw one guy, he commented and said, man, you have the ability to take these, to make a story in 3 minutes. And if so-and-so can do a film, then I don't know why Jeremiah Camara can't do a film. He wasn't talking to me, but they were talking back and forth in And I thought about that. I said, let me try my hands at a film. And so that's when Contradiction came out in 2013, 3 years after Slave Sermons. And then that led me to the film I just did, came out earlier this year, called Holy Hierarchy. So I just thought that a visual, type of form would be better. Well, not better, but just in addition to the writing. There's a lot of people that don't read, that they need to actually see it. And so I'm still not finished with the Slave Sermons. I've got a few more coming. I think I've got about 50 or 51, something like that. But I've got a few more on the way.
Well, it's
I
good to
just
know
really
that
got my computer back. I mean, I haven't had my computer I'm telling you, it's been about 4 months. So
it's good to know that it's coming back. But your latest, so Holy Hierarchy, and people check it out. It's on Amazon Prime. It's you can get it there and other places, and I'll include those in the show notes. So what is kind of your elevator pitch for people who don't have any idea what it is? Like, what is Holy Hierarchy? What are you
Holy
trying
Hierarchy,
to message, I guess?
yeah, it explains how the beliefs in colonial Virginia, the beliefs in a supreme being, led to beliefs in supreme human beings, and how these beliefs work their way into the legal system and ultimately turning racism into an institution. And so one of the books that I read while attending seminary in school was a book by A. Leon Higginbotham, and the book was called Shades of Freedom, and they have many, many court cases. In addition to that, I went to the library and I researched. I even got more court cases that took place in the 1600s, the 17th century. And I was like, boy, how am I going to make a film that's sexy? And I'm talking about court cases from the 17th century. But I thought they were fascinating. And I realized that racism and religion and Christianity are inextricable. And the law is what enforces these things. To me, racism is the legal backing of a group's prejudices, stereotypes, biases, and ignorance. Once those things are legally backed, it becomes racism. So if I'm walking down the street, someone hits me, that may be prejudice, but if we go to court and there's nothing done about it, then it becomes racism, because racism is attached to a legal component. That's why apartheid was the law. Jim Crow was the law. And so I looked at a lot of these cases, and it just was quite obvious that racism actually stemmed from one group. And I'm not talking about slavery, because that's an economic issue. Racism is a justification of slavery. Well, the reason why we were able to enslave these people was because they weren't really human. So racism wasn't an explanation of slavery, but slavery was purely economics, because you had white slaves, you had other slaves, but to turn that into racism was a justification that these people are somehow different and made differently. And that type of notion actually comes from the idea that there's this God who somehow made whites differently, who somehow fashioned them differently, and made Black people to be subservient, and made Black people to serve whites and obey whites. But it started with the belief, with the presumption that there is a God, and who actually, like I said, made them differently. And they created certain laws to substantiate these notions. And mostly all of these laws started in Virginia. That's why I say we can move out of Virginia. You can go to California, you can go wherever you want to go. But a lot of us still have a Virginia state of mind. Virginia led the rest of the colonies, in the perfection of racism, the laws, the slave codes, and then you had a lot of, you know, it was like your dream team was in Virginia. You know, 7 of the first 10 presidents were from Virginia. You know, I think 10 of the first 12 or 9 of the first 12, something like that, own other human beings. You had people like George Washington, Virginia, Patrick Henry, Virginia, James Madison, Virginia, Thomas Jefferson, Virginia. So all these laws came out of Virginia, and it created what we know as racism. That's why I tell people, you really don't know as much about racism as you might think unless you understand Virginia. When you understand the state of Virginia and how it has played a role in shaping the precepts, the general rules that give us the ideas of how to treat other people. Those are precepts. So there's no penalty if I break these rules, like you break the law of running a red light or something like that. But these precepts are general rules that teach people how to think about other people. Black people are this, black people are this, white people are this, this a Native American tribe, they're this, they're this. And so all these precepts were implicitly put in the law and shape people's ideas of one another. So that's basically, in a long explanation, what holy hierarchy is about.
Basically, you should watch people. Get educated. Come on. Now you're big into how the importance of like religious iconography is in our country. So I visit family members who live in Chattanooga, and if you travel up I-75 from, you're already shaking your head. You know where I'm going. So when you go kind of north of Chattanooga on I-75, you see these giant 3 crosses, and they're like 100 feet tall, and they're on the highway. So what is it about religious iconography that, I don't know, it's just another thing that you kind of talk about in your movies and your content, just like how it affects people to see these things all the time and what it means about like our country and about just who we are supposed to be, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Zach, if you go south, you're going to get more imagery. Like there's a place on I-75 South when you're going down toward Valdosta and you're entering into Florida, there's a place called Tifton, Georgia. And it's just saturated with billboards. They're all over the country. I mean, we can go in Walmart, we can go in Walgreens right now, go in CVS, especially with the Christmas season coming up. Imagery, in many ways, speaks louder than words do. They tap into a deeper level than words. And so when you're able to see this image, it teaches you right away, or it tells your subconscious, hey, if Jesus is white, then his father has to be white. And I always say, Jesus is white because he's white in Walmart. And Walmart is the largest retailer in the world. So just watch during this whole holiday season, you'll be able to go in Walmart, you'll be able to get white nativity scenes. You'll go into Walgreens, you'll go into CVS and other stores, and you'll see these magazines with white Jesus. You go in places like Hobby Lobby, there's white imagery all over. And Zach, if Jesus is white, we should really understand white supremacy a lot better. We should not have a problem with white supremacy. Now, if Jesus is black, then he's got a lot of explaining to do. I would be embarrassed as a black person to say that Jesus is black, that he would not come to our aid in so many instances. But if he's white, I think we should all kind of understand white supremacy. If Jesus is white, I mean, if I really believed that Jesus was black, I couldn't help but to have a certain way that I carried myself. I would have a certain degree of racial esteem. But we all need to just come to our senses and realize that we have a pre-existing medical condition. You know, we want to talk about this COVID and these pre-existing conditions, but we forget the pre-existing mental condition where we actually believe that somebody died 2,000 years ago, came back to life 3 days later, whatever, and is still alive. That is a mental condition.
Somewhere,
and you're putting your hopes and your dreams and your time and your energy and your money into the notion that there was a God who actually had a son. Think about that. He had a son, and he not only did he have a son, but his son was born of a virgin. I mean, if you were the only one to believe this, you know, you would check yourself into a mental institution. But because it's shared by so many, we call it religion. But I think we have to really recognize, you know, we look for racism in so many places, but the racism that's in front of you, the white supremacy that is in front of you, you miss it. Because, you know, if I was trying to read a paper and I had this, you know, I can't see it when it's right here. I have to stand back from it. But I don't care. You can go in flea markets. You can go in bookstores. I don't know if Borders or Barnes and Nobles are still here. I haven't been there so many years. I have so much to read. I read so much, but I just don't go to those places. I have you know, my tablet where I do a lot of reading. But I got books now where I went in Borders and Barnes and Nobles. I know Borders is closed, but Barnes and Nobles, and they said, you know, the story of Christianity. And they've got this big picture of this white image. In fact, if you go online and you Google God, just put in God, nothing but white images will come up. So what are you saying? You're saying that your God is of a particular ethnicity, and then you got these people that say, well, wait a minute, if Jesus really existed in the place where they said he was, he would be more Middle Eastern looking. I mean, get out of here with that. This is not, we don't see Middle Eastern looking people on the nativity scenes. That many houses are going to be, you're going to see, the cities are going to be saturated with white nativity scenes. And nobody is going to say, that is wrong. That is white supremacy. You are doing psychological damage to people who don't look like that. You are building racial esteem. You are encouraging notions of supremacy in people who fit that image. So it's very damaging. And me and my wife have started a nonprofit. It's not here yet, but we're waiting on it. It's called Erica, and that's Ending Religious Iconography in America. It shouldn't be allowed, Zach. You know, one thing I can say about Islam is that you're not going to have any images. You're not going to have any visual
didn't it say in the Bible, like, no graven images? I mean, that's like 80% of Christianity. I mean, people are wearing crosses around their neck.
Exactly. But, you know, people will say, well, wait a minute, because it says right here, his skin was burnt as if it was in the furnace. I mean, listen, if you're black and you believe this, there's something wrong with you as well. That is a mental condition to actually believe that there's somebody 2,000 years old that's looking after your best interest. And the only people who's going to do for you is you. And I just think it speaks to our pre-existing mental condition that here we are in 2020, according to the Roman calendar, still believing in this archaic, primitive stuff. You know, gods come in time and they will go in time, and eventually, like with Toba, like Indra, like Bali, like Apollonius, like Tammuz or Thammuz, like all of these gods that were once here, this God too will be gone. But the reason why this God, this Jesus, was able to last as long as it did and the Bible become the best-selling book of all time was because, Rome was really at the height of their military power to enforce this type of message on you, because you need a government. You need the enforcement of that government. So we talk about separation of church and state, but the government, we wouldn't have religion if it wasn't for the government. The government religion has always pandered to the government. The government panders to religion. Religion and the government have a symbiotic relationship. They always have. And it is the government's responsibility to make sure that no group is crippled psychologically. I don't care where you go, Zach, in the hospitals, in airports, restaurants. We were in a restaurant in Bonita Beach, Florida, back in late August this year. And when we were coming out of this restaurant, not only did they have, I didn't want to eat there. We were exhausted. We just went on and ate because me and my wife have went to places before and have walked out. We just said, what the hell? Let's just eat. We're here. It's late and, whatever. But they had pictures of John Wayne all over the place. John Wayne was a known, I won't say racist, but he was a bigot. And on the way out of the restaurant, they had this big picture of Jesus. We didn't see it coming in, but you could see it as we went out. This should be illegal. You should not be able to plaster this stuff all over the country as if it's okay. And so if it doesn't matter what color Jesus is, then stop putting these white images up. Don't put any images up.
Well, I can't get out of this interview without asking you, since oddly, with the election just happening last week, Georgia's going to be like the center of politics in America. So do you have any thoughts on Biden getting, I'll put it this in air quotes since we don't know, elected, and then the possibility of two senators in Georgia getting Democrats possibly getting elected in the next couple months?
Yeah, I mean,
just leave it open for you. Whatever you want to say about it.
I haven't watched the news since March, Zach. You can't
smart,
really
man.
see how crazy something is until you take a step back from it. That's the only way you can do it.
Yeah.
If you want to see something crazy, you have to take a step back. So I don't know what Trump said. I don't know what Biden said. I don't know what Biden did. I don't know. Of course, I know that he chose Kamala Harris. I'll know these things simply through osmosis. Just being around people. Of course, I own a business and I'm going to be around people. I hear things. I meet a lot of people throughout the month who bring their, services to my business. And so you'll learn it. You'll hear about it. But I don't follow politics. I didn't watch soap operas growing up. I didn't watch All My Children and The Young and the Restless. But I just find it really strange that we elected or selected or whatever you want to call it, a 78-year-old man who's probably got pre-dementia. By the time his term is over, he'll be 82. We started getting on Reagan when he was 74 years old to get the hell out of office because you're getting too old. Here's a man that's 78. He'll be 78 in a few days. He'll be 78 before he takes the presidency. And 82. So, I mean, I just want to know who we have elected and what we have elected. But, as an animal, my job, when I see that's in the jaws of the cheetah, to me, the gazelle is the hero because it keeps kicking. That gazelle could give up and say, I know that I'm in the jaws of the cheetah, but it keeps kicking. And sometimes when it kicks, it gets away. That's what we're supposed to do, irrespective of who's the president. We got to kick. We got to survive. We got to do whatever that we can do. But I'm not really into politics like that. I took a step back because all you hear is Biden, COVID, racism, Trump. Biden, COVID, racism, Trump, over and over. That's enough to drive someone insane. So when you take a step back from the media, who is, have to realize and be quite honest, they have their own agenda. They all made close to $1 billion. Fox made over $1 billion. So they have their own agenda. So they cherry pick. And they're going to find the bloodiest stuff that they can find to put on the news. And the news is very imbalanced. So when they talk about racism and all of this type of stuff, Zach, every day there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of interactions between blacks and whites that are positive, that are good. But you're not going to hear about that, unless it's in the entertainment world. You just won't hear about it because it's not sexy enough for CNN. It's not sexy enough for MSNBC. So they want to tell me that somebody in Podunk, West Virginia said the N-word. I mean, the news, we can call them reporters, but they're really shit starters. That's really what they are. And the news's job is to report things, to incite you, to stress you, to cause you to react in a negative way. Now, if you do that, then you're supposed to balance it out and give us things that bring us joy, give us things that are, fruitful and beneficial for us. But the news doesn't do that. And so, Zach, I'm too old to give my attention away like that. I don't want to get on my deathbed and say, I have really been informed by CNN. I want to say I have lived. And there's no way that we're going to come downstairs in our house coat and our slippers and our unbrushed teeth and cut it on CNN and actually think that we're being informed. I mean, they tell us what they want us to know, and we hear what they want us to hear. So I'm not one to really get into the politics. If my trash is not getting picked up, I can't call Biden to come get my trash. I would say the local politics, my solar system that affects me, the taxes that I'll pay, the happenings around where I live is much more impactful to me. So I wouldn't say that politics doesn't have a place, but I mean, I'm just not of the mindset to think, especially being a black person, that somebody in office is going to come along and rescue us and elevate us from off the bottom rungs of society. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me decade after decade with the thought that somebody's going to make my life better, make our communities better. Shame on us. And in fact, I want to say that you're conquerors, blacks talk about this equality. I've never read anywhere, never saw any on television or read in any book or any documentary, any films or anything where any conqueror stole your land, stole your resources, kidnapped you, enslaved you, held you in bondage for hundreds of years, and then turn around and share all of that with you equally. That would render slavery in vain. Slavery was an economic initiative to put whites in an advantageous position and to create the power equation of white over non-white and to attain privilege for whites. So a lot of lives were lost. I think it was 600,000 people, some were black, but mainly white men were killed in the Civil War. A lot of lives were lost in order to keep black people enslaved. So they're not going to just turn around and share equally what they had with you. And I don't know why you would, want that anyway. But the only way you can look up to somebody is if you see yourself as being on the ground. And I don't. So there's nobody or no thing that I am envious of to the point that I want to be like them.
Yeah, it does seem like the media is kind of invested in Trump just because it's such great nonstop fodder. And usually it's just like no one's going to remember no matter what it is in a week, no matter what happens. And that's actually on purpose, but it's well done. But yeah, it does get someone tired rather quickly. And we made it past 50 minutes. Dang, nabbit. Talking to Jeremiah is it's just a treat. It's just great to
Yeah,
actually
because I run my
get to get
mouth so
through.
much, Zach. I run my mouth so much, so it's
Well,
easy to go over time.
exactly. That's why I do interviews. I ask a question and I just sit here for 10 minutes. It's a glorious thing. And you've done so many of these. You have answers. You're always ready to talk. But where can people find you online? Everything will be included in the show notes. But where can people, because I know you have current projects and future projects, and where can people find out about all that?
Well, people can write me at slavesermons@gmail. You can visit my website at jeremiahcamara.com. Stay tuned. I am working on a project. I just don't want to disclose it right now because I'm still working on it to give it, still working on the foundation of it. But I definitely am working on a project right now. So visit jeremiahcamara.com or visit email me at slavesermons@gmail.com. And I've got my film Contradiction is on Amazon Prime. Contradiction, A Question of Faith. And that film basically, just deals with the saturation of churches and Black communities coexisting, with poverty and powerlessness. Why are there so many churches yet so many problems? And is there a correlation between high praise and low productivity? And my second film on Amazon Prime is called Holy Hierarchy. That was done by my main guy, videographer, Marcus Reyes. And I put that film together. And of course, that's Holy Hierarchy, the religious roots of racism. And leave a comment, when you watch the films, whether it's good or bad. I mean, because that's what keeps it engaged and keeps it engaged on Amazon. So the more comments, the better.
Yeah, give feedback, everybody. Every guest I have on this show, find their podcast, give them 5 stars, find their content, and say you liked it. Or if you didn't like it, give them a good reason why, and they can tell you why you're wrong. So,
and also check out the Slave Sermons on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
Just Google Slave Sermons, and 50 of those will come up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's sometimes this content on YouTube can be long, like 2-3 hours. Slave Sermons, maybe 10 minutes.
Right.
That's
the longest one. It's been 10 minutes.
You can roll through a lot of them really quickly, and it's good to have content that's well thought and relatively short. So thank you, Jeremiah, for being on tonight. It's really great finally getting to chat with you. It's been a good time.
Zach, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate you reaching out to me, man, and having me as a guest on your podcast. I appreciate that.
Glad to have you on. Thanks.
All right, man.